Part 1. The passing of Ariane, the conquering of Elfin Arvan, the Grand Alliance, Prince Malekith becomes aware of his destiny. Chapter 1. Broken Legacy. None knew at the time that the greatest saviour of the elves would also be their doom. Yet there was one who foresaw the darkness and death to come, Calidor Dragon Tamer. When an Ariane the Defender, bulwark against the demons and first of the Phoenix Kings, drew the sword of Cain from its black altar, Calidor, greatest mage of Ulthuan, was gifted with a dark prophecy. Calidor saw that in taking the dire blade forged for the god of murder, an Ariane awakened the bloodthirsty spirit that had been buried deep within the elves. In an Ariane's line more than any other, the call for war and the thrill of battle was stirred, and across the Isle of Ulthuan love of bloodletting was kindled, and the innocence of the Everqueen's rule passed forever. That an Ariane drew the sword at all was born out of grief and anger, and its call haunted him until the day he drove it back into the fell altar of Cain, just before he died. It was that same anguish and loss that drove him to marry the seeress Morathai, whom the Phoenix King had rescued from the grip of chaos. Morathai wielded the power of magic without reserve, eager to harness the great energies unleashed upon the world by the coming of chaos. There were those who saw such practice as obscene and dangerous, and there were whispers that Morathai had bewitched an Ariane. That she craved power was plain for many to see. Yet an Ariane was oblivious to their protests and banished them from his presence. At Anlec, an Ariane and Morathai held court, and in that bleak time their palace was a fortress of war and sorcery. The deadliest warriors came and learnt at an Ariane's hand, while the most gifted spellweavers were taught the deepest secrets known to Morathai. With spell and spear, the warriors of Anlec carved the kingdom of Nagarith from the grip of the demons, wielding grave weapons forged in the furnaces of Vol the smith god by the servants of Calidor. It was into the mist of destruction and vengeance that Malekith was born, son of an Ariane and Morathai. As was the tradition of those times, a blade was forged for him at the hour of his birth, and he was taught to wield it as soon as his limbs were strong enough to hold it aloft. From his father he learnt the skills of rulership and warcraft, and from his mother Malekith was gifted the power to bind the tempests of magic to his will. Into Malekith, the Phoenix King poured all of his wisdom and knowledge, but also his thirst for vengeance upon the demons that had taken his first wife and the children born by her. Into Malekith, Morathai invested her will to achieve anything no matter the cost, and the hunger for glory and greatness. Remember that you are the son of an Ariane, she told Malekith when he was but a child. Remember that you are the son of Morathai. In your blood flows the greatest strength of this isle. You are a born warrior, an Ariane said. You should be fell with blade and bow, and you shall wield armies as lesser elves wield their swords. Day after day they told their son this, from before he was old enough to understand their words, to the day an Ariane died. It was to the lament of an Ariane that the tide of demons did not cease, and his constant battles were thus ever in vain. Calidor it was that created the great vortex, which to this day siphons away the power of chaos and drains it from the world. With the magical energy needed to sustain their material forms now much diminished, the demons perished, though Calidor and his mages were trapped in stasis within the vortex, cursed to fight against the encroachment of chaos for eternity. And Ariane gave his life, defending Calidor and his mages, and with his last strength returned to the blighted isle and restored the Godslayer to the black altar of Cain. In the time after the demons had passed, the great princes of the elves, those warriors and mages who had fought alongside Calidor and Ariane, came together to decide the path of the future rule of Ulthuan. In the forests of Avalon, from where the slain Everqueen had ruled, they held the first council, a year after Anarion's departure. The princes met in the Glade of Eternity, a great amphitheatre of trees at the centre of which stood a shrine to Aisha, the goddess of nature, matron of the Everqueen. Grown of twining silver roots and branches, with emerald green leaves festooned with blooms in every season, the Ain Yshane glowed with mystical power. By the light of the moons and the stars, the first council convened, bathed in the twilight of the open skies and the aura of the blessed trees. Morathai and Malekith were there, dark-haired and coldly beautiful. The seeress wore a dress of black cloth so fine that it appeared as a diaphanous cloud that barely concealed her alabaster skin. Her raven hair was swept back by bands of finely woven silver threads, hung with rubies, and her lips were painted to match the glittering gems. Slender and noble of bearing she stood, and bore a staff of black iron in her hands. Malekith was no less imposing. As tall as his father, and of similarly dark eyes, he wore a suit of golden mail and a breastplate upon which was embossed the coiling form of a dragon. A long sword hung in a gold-threaded scabbard at his waist, its pommel wrought from the same precious metal, a dragon's claw grasping a sapphire the size of a fist. With them came other princes of Naggareth, who had survived the fighting on the Isle of the Dead. They were dressed in their fine armour and wore dark cloaks that hung to their ankles, and proudly bore the scars and trophies of their wars with the demons. The sinister princes of the north were arrayed with knives, spears, swords, bows, shields, and armour wrought with the runes of Vol, testaments to the power of Naggareth and Anlek. Banner-bearers with black and silver standards stood in attendance, and heralds sounded the trumpets and pipes at their arrival. A cabal of sorcerers accompanied the Naggarothi contingent, clad in robes of black and purple, their faces tattooed and scarred with ritual sigils, their heads shaved. Another group there was of princes from the lands founded by Calidor in the south, and from the New Realms to the east, Cathik, Etain, Yvres, and others. At the fore stood the young mage Thiriol, and golden-haired Meniath, son of Calidor Dragon-tamer. In contrast to the Naggarothi, these elves of the south and east were as day is to night. Though all had played their part in the war against the demons, these princes had cast off their war gear, and instead carried staves and sceptres, and in the place of war helms they wore golden crowns as symbols of their power. They were clad predominantly in white, the colour of mourning, in remembrance of the losses their people had suffered. The Naggarothi eschewed such affections, even though they had lost more than most. Ariane has passed on, Morathai declared to the council. The Godslayer, the Widowmaker, he returned to the altar of Cain, so that we can be free of war. In peace, my son wishes to rule, and in peace we would explore this new world that surrounds us. Yet I fear peace now is a thing of memory, and perhaps one day to be nothing more than myth. Do not think that the great powers that now gaze upon our world with hungry, immortal eyes can be so easily defeated. Though the demons are banished from our lands, the power of chaos is not wholly exiled from the world. I have gazed far and wide this past year, and I have seen what changes the fall of the gods has wrought upon us. In war, I would follow no other king, said Meneth, striding to the centre of the circle formed by the princes. In Naggareth is found the greatest strength of arms upon this isle. The war is over, though, and I am not sure that the strength of Naggareth lies in tranquillity. There are other realms now, and cities where there were castles. Civilization has triumphed over chaos on Ulthuan, and we shall take that civilization across the seas, and the elves shall reign where the gods have fallen. And such arrogance and blindness shall see us humbled, said Morathai. Far to the north the lands are blasted wastelands, where creatures corrupted by dark magic crawl and flit. Ignorant savages build altars of skulls in praise of the new gods, and spill the blood of their kin in worship. Monstrous things melded of flesh and magic prowl the darkness beyond our shores. If we are to bring our light to these benighted isles, it shall be upon the glittering tip of spear and arrow. Hardship and bloodshed are the price we pay for our survival, argued Meneth. Naggareth shall march at the forefront of our hosts, and with the valour of the Naggarothi we shall pierce that darkness. However, we cannot be ruled by war as we were when an Ariane strode amongst us. We must reclaim our spirits from the love of bloodshed that consumed us, and seek a more enlightened path towards building a new world. We must allow the boughs of love and friendship to flourish from the roots of hatred and violence sown by the coming of an Ariane. We shall never forget his legacy, but our hearts cannot be ruled by his anger. My son is the heir of an Ariane, Morathi said quietly, menace in her soft voice. That we stand here at all is the prize wrested from defeat by my late husband. But won no less by my father's sacrifice, Meneth countered. For a year we have pondered what course of action to take since the deaths of Anarion and Calidor. Naggareth shall take its place amongst the other realms, great in its glory, yet not greater than any other kingdom. Greatness is earned by deeds, not bestowed by others, said Morathai, striding forwards to stand in front of Meneth. She planted her staff in the ground between them and glared at the prince, her grip tight upon the metal rod. It is not to fall upon each other that we fought against the demons and sacrificed so much, said Thiriol hurriedly. Clad in robes of white and yellow that glimmered with golden thread, the mage laid a hand upon the shoulder of Morathai and upon the arm of Meneth. In us has been awakened a new spirit, and we must temper our haste with cool judgment, just as a newly forged blade must be quenched in the calming waters. Who here feels worthy enough to take up the crown of the Phoenix King? Morathai asked, glaring at the princes with scorn. Who here, save my son, is worthy of being Anarion's successor? There was silence for a while, and none of the dissenters could meet Morathai's gaze, save for Meneth, who returned her cold stare without flinching. Then a voice rang out across the glade, from the shadows of the trees encircling the council. I have been chosen, the voice called. From the trees walked Belshazzar, ruling prince of the plains of Tiranoc. Behind him strode a gigantic figure in shape as of a tree given the power to walk. Oakheart was his name, one of the tree men of Avalon, who had acted as guard to the Everqueen and tended the sacred shrines of the elves' homeland. Chosen by whom? Asked Morathai contemptuously. By the princes and the Ever-Queen, Belshazzar replied, standing to one side of the holy tree of Aisha. Asteriel was slain, Morothai said. The reign of the Ever-Queen is no more. She lives on, said a ghostly, feminine voice that drifted around the glade. Asteriel was slain by the demons, Morothai insisted, casting her gaze about to spy whence the voice had come, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. The leaves on all of the trees began to quiver, filling the glade with a gentle susurrus as if a wind whispered through the treetops, though the air was still. The long grass of the glade began to sway in the same invisible breeze, bending towards the Ain Shane at the clearing's centre. The glow of the sacred tree grew stronger, bathing the council in a golden light, dappled with sky blues and verdant greens. In the shimmering brightness, a silhouette of greater light appeared upon the knotted trunk, resolving itself into the form of a young elf maiden. Morothai gasped, for at first it seemed as if Astariel indeed still lived. The maiden's golden hair hung to her waist in long plaited tresses woven with flowers of every colour, and she wore the green robes of the Ever-Queen. Her face was delicate, even by elven standards, and her eyes the startling blue of the clearest summer skies. As the light dimmed, the elf's features became clearer, and Morothai saw that this newcomer was not Astariel. There was a likeness, of that Morothai was aware, but she relaxed as she scrutinized the girl. You are not Astariel, Morothai declared confidently. You are an impostor. Not Astariel, you are right, replied the maiden, her voice soft yet carrying easily to the furthest reaches of the glade. I am not an impostor either. I am Yvraine, daughter of an Ariane and Astariel. More trickery, shrieked Morothai, rounding on the princes with such an expression of anger that many flinched from her ire. Yvraine is also dead. You conspire to keep my son from his rightful inheritance. She is Yvraine, said Oakheart, his voice a melodic noise, like the sighing of a light wind through branches. Though Astariel remained to protect Avalon against the demons, she bid us to take her children to safety. To the Gain Vale I carried them, where no other elf has trod. There my kin and I fought the demons, and kept Yvraine and Morelian safe those many years. At this there were gasps from the Nagarothi, none louder than the exclamation of Malekith. Then my half-brother also still lives, the prince demanded, and Ariane's first son is alive. Calm yourself, Malekith, said Thiriel. Morelian has taken ship and sailed from Ulthuan. He is a child of Avalon, and as is Yvraine, and he seeks no claim to the rule of Nagaryth. He is blessed of Aisha, not a scorn of Cain, and seeks neither dominion nor fealty. You kept this from an Ariane? Morothai's tone was full of incredulity. You allowed him to believe his children were dead, and raised them separated from their father? You have hidden them from— I am the beloved of Aisha, said Yvraine, her voice stern, silencing Morothai. In me is reborn the spirit of the Ever-Queen. Amlech is a place of blood and rage. It could not be my home. I could not live amongst the tate of Cain. And so Oakheart and his kind raised me in the manner and place fitting for my station. I see now your conspiracy, said Morothai, stalking across the glade to confront the princes. In secrecy you have muttered and whispered, and kept the Nagarothi from your councils. You seek to supplant the line of an Ariane with one of your own, and wrest the power of Ulthuan from Nagaryth. There is no power to wrest, no line to break, replied Thiriel. Only in pain and death does Nagareth prevail. We sent messengers to Anlek, and you turned them away. We sought to include you in our deliberations, but you would send no embassy. We gave you every right and opportunity to make the claim for your son, and you chose to tread your own path. There is no conspiracy. I am the widow of an Ariane, the queen of Ulthuan, Morothai snarled. When the demons preyed upon your people, did an Ariane and his lieutenants stand by and discuss matters in council? When Calador began his spell, did he debate its merits with the peons? To rule is to wield, the right to decide for all. You are no longer queen, Morothai, said Yvraine, ghosting softly across the glade, her steps as light as settling snowflakes. The Ever-Queen has returned, and I shall rule with Belshazzar, just as an Ariane reigned with my mother. You will wed Belshazzar? Asked Morothai, turning on Yvraine. As an Ariane wed my mother, so the Ever-Queen will marry the Phoenix King, and ever shall it be, down all of the ages, Yvraine declared. I cannot marry Malekith, my half-brother, no matter what his entitlements or qualities, to succeed his father. Usurpers! Shrieked Morothai, raising up her staff. Malekith leapt forward and snatched the rod from her grip. No more, the Prince of Nagareth cried out. I would not have the realm forged by my father torn asunder by this dispute. Malekith laid a comforting hand upon the cheek of his mother, and when she was calmed, he returned her staff to her. With a last venomous glare at Yvraine and Belshazzar, the seeress turned her back upon them and returned to the Nagarothi contingent to glower and sneer. I do not seek the throne of Ulthuan to become a tyrant, said Malekith. It is to honour my father and see his legacy fulfilled that I would become Phoenix King. I do not claim this as a right of birth, but surrender myself to the judgment of those here. If it is the decision of this council that Belshazzar should wed my half-sister and become king, I will not oppose it. I ask only that you consider my petition this one last time, for it is plain that we have allowed division and misconception to cloud our minds. The princes nodded in agreement at these well-spoken words, and gathered together under the eaves of the Avalorn trees. They talked for a long time, until dawn touched her red fingers upon the treetops, and the morning mists drifted up from the fertile earth. Back and forth swayed the debate, for some were heartened by Malekith's gentle entreaty, and believed that though he was his father's son, he had not wielded the God-Slayer, and so was not touched by its darkness. Others reminded the council of Calador's prophecy, that an Ariane's line was touched by Cain, and argued that a child of Anlek could never be freed from its curse. We have made our decision, Thiriel informed the Nagarothi. While Malekith is a fine prince, he is yet young, and has much to learn about the world, as do we all. Now is a time for wisdom and guidance, not iron rule, and for these reasons we remain committed to the investiture of Belshazzar. Morothai gave a scream of derision, but Malekith held up a hand to silence her. The fate of Ulthuan is not for a single elf to decide, and I accede to the wisdom of this council, Malekith declared. He crossed the glade, and to the amazement of all, bent to one knee before Belshazzar. Belshazzar shall succeed my father, though he cannot replace him, and with his wisdom we shall herald a new age for our people. May the gods grant our new king the strength to prosper and rule justly, and know that should ever his will falter or his resolve waver, Nagareth stands ready. Though Malekith bore himself with dignity and respect, he was sorely disappointed by the council's decision. He returned to Nagareth with his mother, and did not attend the ritual wedding of Belshazzar and Yvraine. However, he did travel to the Isle of Flame to bear witness to Belshazzar's passing through the sacred flames of Azurian, though the sight stirred within him a kernel of jealousy that he could not wholly quench. The shrine itself was a high pyramid in form, built above the burning flame of the king of the gods. The flame danced and flickered at the heart of the temple, thrice the height of an elf, burning without noise or heat. Runes of gold were inlaid into the marble tiles of the floor around the central fire, and these blazed with a light that was not wholly reflected from the flame. Upon the white walls were hung braziers wrought in the shape of phoenixes, with their wings furled, and more magical fire burned within them, filling the temple with a golden glow. All the princes of Ulthuan were there, resplendent in their cloaks and gowns, with high helms and tall crowns of silver and gold, studded with gemstones from every colour of the rainbow. Only the Nagarothi stood out amongst this feast of colour, taciturn and sombre in their black and purple robes. Morathai stood with Malekith and his followers, the seeress eyeing the proceedings with suspicion. Astromancers were present too, 7 of them, who had determined that this day was the most auspicious to crown the new Phoenix King. They wore robes of deep blues, patterned with glistening diamonds in the constellations of the stars, linked by the finest lines of silver and platinum. The astrologers stood next to the chanting priests of Azurian, who weaved their prayers around Belshazzar so that he might pass through the flames unscathed. Behind the priests sat the oracles of Azurian, 3 elven maidens of pale skin and blonde hair, garbed in raiment of silver that shimmered in the dazzling light. Yvraine and her maiden guard had journeyed from Avalon to join the ascension of her ceremonial husband. These warrior women wore skirts of silvered scale, edged with green cloth, and carried garlands of flowers in place of their spears and bows, for no weapon was allowed to pass the threshold of Azurian's temple. Belshazzar stood with the high priest before the flame, and about his shoulders was hung a cloak of white and black feathers, a newly woven symbol of his power and authority. As did Ariane the Defender, so too shall I submit myself to the judgment of the greatest power, Belshazzar solemnly intoned. My purity proven by this ordeal, I shall ascend to the throne of the Phoenix King, to rule wisely and justly in the name of the King of Gods. Your father needed no spells of protection, muttered Morathai. This is a fraud, of no more legitimacy than the sham wedding to Yvraine. Malekith did not hear her words, for his attention and thoughts were bent entirely upon the unfolding ceremony. As the priests burned incense and made offerings to Azurian, the oracles began to sing quietly, their verses almost identical, but for a few words here and there, which rose into a joyful harmony as Belshazzar was ushered towards the flame of Azurian. The Phoenix King-to-be turned and looked back towards the princes with no sign of trepidation or exultation. With a respectful nod, Belshazzar faced towards the centre of the shrine and walked forwards, slowly ascending the shallow steps that led up to the dais over which the gods' cleansing fires gleamed. All present then fell hushed in anticipation as Belshazzar stepped within the flame, which turned to a glaring white and forced the onlookers to cast their gazes away, lest they be blinded by its intensity. As their eyes grew accustomed to the bright burning of the flame, they could see the vague shape of Belshazzar within, arms upraised as he offered fealty to Azurian. Then the Phoenix King turned slowly and stepped back out of the flames unharmed. There was a sighing of exultation as the princes expressed their relief, that all went well. The Nagarothi remained silent. The entourage left, laughing and chattering, save for Malekith, who stayed for a long while, gazing at the flame and pondering his fate. The sacred fire had returned to its shifting colours, now seeming dim after its dazzling eruption. To Malekith it seemed as if they had been diminished, tainted by the presence of Belshazzar. Unaware of anything but that burning shrine, Malekith walked slowly forwards, his mind a swirl of conflicting emotions. If he but dared the flame and survived, without the spells of the priests to protect him, then surely it was the will of Azorian that he succeed his father. Yet what if he was not strong enough? Would the burning of the flames devour him? What then would be left of his hopes and dreams for Nagaroth? Without realization, Malekith stood directly before the fires, mesmerized by their shifting patterns. The urge to reach out gripped him, and he was about to place his hand into the flame when he heard the footsteps of the priests re-entering the temple. Snatching his hand away, Malekith turned from the sacred fire and strode quickly from the shrine, ignoring the priests' inquiring glances. There were to be many days of feasting and celebration, but Malekith left as soon as the ceremony was complete, his duties having been fulfilled. He felt no urge to linger here, where his father had first thrown himself upon the mercy of the greatest god and been reborn as the saviour of his people. If Belshazzar wished to be Phoenix King, then Malekith was satisfied to acquiesce. There were more than enough challenges ahead for him to overcome. Malekith knew, without inciting rivalry and discord, content for the moment, he journeyed back to Amlech to take up his rule.